Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Sermon, and I'm thrilled to have you here today with me on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. This show is for those who are wanting to learn more about creating financial wellness, and we will be taking different life cycles. We're going to explore them both financially and emotionally, because personal finances are usually not so much about the money, but rather they are actually more about your emotions associated with your finances. Although we may be fairly general in our discussions, we'd love to hear from you to make it more relevant and more personal. So please do reach out to us. You can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. Or you can post comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or any of the other platforms you might be listening to this. Today, we are going to explore child support. And more specifically, are we doing it wrong? Is the current way we handle child support really in the best interest of our children? I mean, after all, child support should be for the benefit and betterment of our children, right? So today's guest is Carl Roberts. He is the founder of CEO of Split Smart. And Carl is a divorce expert. He certainly understands high conflict divorces and knows when to take the emotions away, that when you do, everyone really, bottom line, wants peace for themselves, for the other party, and especially for their children. Carl, thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Hirsch, for having me here. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
It's going to be a great discussion. Our offline discussions have been great, and I think this is such an important topic in so many different ways. So before we really jump into the topic, I'm going to ask, can you just share a little bit about your background, help people understand the passion behind what you do and why you do it?
Yeah, no doubt. Like a lot of us in the business, we were kind of inspired by our own life's journeys. Mine was a 9-year high conflict divorce and custody battle, several $100,000, lots of life, lots of energy, lots of love, lots of time just wasted. And, just never, it didn't need to be. And, that's really, my two goals. I've got two goals around it. And, part of it is solving, the everybody lying about money part of divorce. But the other big part where my heart really is just keeping kids out of the middle. And, I think I do our app does a really good job at helping people, even when they're less than amicable, again, help keep the kids out of the middle of their divorce.
And you and I, we've spoken quite a few times over the last few months. I've seen a demo. I agree. I think it does a great job, but we will get more into that. That's maybe a teaser for everybody to stay around and learn about a better way to do something. And you're right. You and I have actually spoken about the new generation of divorce professionals, and we'll touch on that as well. And basically, so many of us who have been impacted by divorce and realize this process is broken. We need a better way. And I think those are the kind of things, that passion that you're bringing is really going to make such a big difference. I work on the financial side of divorce. You're working predominantly on helping the child support side and the betterment of children. And as we get more momentum of professionals like us, I really think things are going to be so much better than they were even just 5 years ago, which sounds kind of crazy, but and everyone knows about the idea of child support. Many people they've heard of it. They might be receiving it or paying it, but they really can't tell you very much about it, right? The history, how's it calculated? What are the guidelines behind it? And, why is it different from state to state? I mean, it's the same child. You put them in Montana, you put them in California, Colorado, New York, it doesn't really make a difference. It's the same child, right? So can you give us a little bit of an overview of kind of where child support came from, the general flow of how it comes into play during a divorce? And I do say general because, as I pointed out, it differs from state to state, which in itself might not even make sense, but give us a little bit of a background on that if you can.
Well, I'm not very complimentary of the system by any means. It originated really in the 70s, and it came from the standpoint that the federal government wanted a way to offload their financial burden of single low-income mothers. And so so from the get-go, it's really for all the wrong reasons, all the wrong reasons, all the wrong beliefs and everything else. And so as the government had all these single low-income mothers, and they were quite a burden on the federal system, ultimately through the states. But in their brilliance, they decided, well, they go help subsidize that through the low-income fathers. So rob Peter to pay Paul type thing, I guess, or you can't get blood out of a turnip.
Right.
So you got that basic goal there, but then underlying that is the two basic premises that it was built upon: that every man had to be forced to pay for to support his child, and that no mother could support their child without the help of man or government. And so again, just coming from the completely wrong perspective, now it evolves into something that is today, I believe, is one of the greatest cancers on divorcing families.
So I think we've answered this, but the big question and the title of our show and what we're going to dig into more: are we doing child support wrong?
Absolutely. Now, I mean, I'll say that our government is doing it wrong, and I mean that's the federal. It starts under the federal Social Security Act, Title 4D, something, and which is a $7 billion annual program that drives funding through the states, and every state has to have its own guidelines to kind of qualify to get that state funding.
Right.
Like a lot of government programs, it's everything's driven by money, and so the states want that money, so they're enacting their laws and statutes and rules, and they just really are messed up. However, you have a lot of amicable parents that just want to get divorced, and most all of us just want to support our child to the best of our ability. And a lot of amicable parents figure this out easily enough every day, outside the courts, outside the state, outside anything else. They just get it done because they don't want all the BS of what the government tells them is right, because they know it's not.
Right. And, I just want to throw out a quick statistic while you were talking. I quickly Googled, and this comes from the government, this statistic, 1975, and we'll come back to why 1975 later in the show, because I have some thoughts on that. But only 27.4% of the workforce were women. So coming back to your points that you've just made, it was such a different society 40 years ago, to where we are now. And that's even more than 40 years ago, quite honestly. But, so we're going to come back to this and talk a bit about this. But I'm going to ask you to give a couple more examples, if you can, about how, or maybe to demonstrate why our child support system is not always in the best interest of the children. And again, I want to come back to constantly focusing on that's what it's intended for, right, is children. So if it's not being in the best interest for our children, why are we not looking at changing or doing something different? So do you have any other thoughts or examples around how to demonstrate that?
Yeah, you just look at some of the statistics around contested divorce, type thing, to me, one of the greatest societal ills today is really fatherlessness. And, fatherlessness is really, a large culprit or large cause of fatherlessness is promoted by child support. And in that, it really, child support as it is configured today by the states, by the federal government, is a price tag on your child's head. It puts the child directly in the middle of the divorce conflict. And so for those who are emotionally wrought or personality disorders or getting bad advice, now they're using their child as a prize and a pawn, to hopefully get more child support or have control over the other, or just be able to kind of exact their hatred upon their ex-spouse. But so yeah, fatherlessness. I absolutely will translate the rates of suicide, of homicide, of child abuse, domestic violence. All have child support system today is absolutely a big contributing factor to all those rates today.
That's incredible because you think about the conflict within a divorce sometimes, not always, and obviously the more amicable you can be, the better, not just for the divorce and the process of going through the divorce, but beyond it. But you point out a few things that I think are astounding. Number one is the side effects and the impact. And I say it as a side effect, but it sounds like it's a fairly direct impact on other social ills beyond even the divorce process, and will linger way beyond the divorce process as well. That's number one. And some of those are obviously catastrophic. If you heard any of those things you just said in the news, you'd be blown away. That's a big piece of it. The other piece that you, I think, more alluded to, but I'd like to say it directly maybe, is, and these are my words, I'm not putting words in your mouth, the process doesn't take into account so many factors. You said, oh, well, a child is 8 years old, 12 years old, whatever it is. Here's a formula, go run a formula, and you got a price on the kid's head. That's what you're going to pay every month, right? And pretty much you can find online, every state has their own calculator of how that state takes into account what they do. But what happens if that kid does have a special needs or physical disability, or, a myriad of things that might be not taken into account by a general formula, which I think is an enormous piece to it. There are other things within the law that I also don't really understand. I'll give you one example there. In Illinois, there's a magic number of keeping, if you paying child support, you want to be over the 146 nights a year. If you're receiving, you want to keep the other spouse to under 146 nights. And that cliff, as I call it, literally for 1 or 2 nights different a year can triple the amount of child support that is paid, which is incredible for 1 or 2 nights. So clearly, when you look at something like that, it seems quite arbitrary in many ways as well. So I think so much of what you've just pointed out is enormously important to think about. And when we negotiate in a divorce, we don't think about it in a vacuum. Only the home, only the retirement account, only the bank account, or whatever else. We do want to look at it in the larger context. I think this is a perfect example where child support also should be looked at in a much larger context. And I know your system, we're going to get to it. Your system, I think, has a great way of managing that and taking in all these variables that we're talking about, special needs and, physical handicaps, and, maybe they're playing instruments and they have other expenses beyond what just a calculator is kind of thinking about. So, and you talk about 2 systems of child support. So I'm going to ask, can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by 2 systems of child support and how it is currently?
Well, yeah, certainly. So what the federal government, state governments operate with what I call in the pay child support model. And in that pay child support model, the 2 things that are problematic, if to say the least, is first is that they are, in 36 states, they count the number of overnights to determine how much child support, they count the number of overnights the child is with each parent to determine, to help calculate child support. And just kind of as you talked about in Illinois, there's that cliff at 146 days. In Colorado, is a cliff at 52 days or 90 days or whatever the case may be. But while I can understand the logic, and we know why that was there to begin with, it just could not be more any conflict oriented or asinine or plain ass stupid for what we're doing, it because that's where we put the price tag on the kid's head. You can have wonderful parents, loving parents, and they sit there and they look at a schedule of a 75-25 that works well for them because dad travels and And but when dad looks at the child support guidelines, he says, I got to have 50-50. So that financial incentive of custody creates a conflict that just wouldn't otherwise be there. And and so it just does not allow for people. It just doesn't in the guidelines. Just does not look at people being able to make their own decisions, being able to figure out how they want to work with it, within their own family, support their own children. So the government has their guidelines, which again is just puts the price tag on your child's head with the financial incentive of custody. That's one. The second second part of that is in most every state, there's what's called lifestyle adjustment that goes into the calculations. So like in Colorado, which, is just backwards, is it from the standpoint that, that they're trying to maintain the lifestyle of the child that they had before the divorce. Well, they're getting a divorce and they're going to be living in two homes, not one. And so needless to say, every parent's, way of life gets upset. I mean, there probably going to be job changes. I mean, whether mom had a job or not beforehand, she'd probably get one next after that. So being able to balance those lifestyles between homes is just not appropriate. Again, it's just more conflict fuel added to the fire. And so counting overnights, dumb. Adding, lifestyle adjustments, fuel onto the conflict fire. And none of that is for the benefit of our child. It just creates this perpetual, this pay model of perpetual conflict that promotes child abuse, suicide, homicide.
No, I would venture to say, I've never obviously done a study. I haven't read a study on this, but I would venture to say if you interviewed kids, they would much rather want, even if they individually engaged parents in their lives, they would want the parents, even though they're divorced, to get on well. As a parent, I always want to role model the best behavior for my kid, and this creates an enormous stress in a way that just, potentially puts me in a way that I cannot. I love what you're saying in driving a need to change this. And I think, just extremely thought-provoking when you look at somebody who has been on the road and they just can't afford, at that 75% example, they're on the road, maybe they can only take them 25%, and now they might have to quit a job that they love, that's fulfilling, that's rewarding, just because they can't be on the road anymore because they can't afford that because of an antiquated law, potentially. That's pretty incredible, actually. I never thought about it in that way, but it makes complete sense, actually.
Let me interrupt and just say, so again, contested custody is never about the child. We talk about best interest of the child, and
right.
That's just really a false banner that the system kind of has you operating within. But it's contested custody is about money, control, and or hatred. And but you have these amicable parents, and we talked about the two models of child support.
Right.
We talked about the pay model, but now the provide model is what these amicable couples figure out easily enough every day. Most all of us want to provide to the best of our ability for our children, but not a single one amongst us wants to provide for the ex through child support, right?
Right.
So that's the basic concept. I mean, so when you put these lifestyle additions or language into child support, now we're taking into houses and mortgages and rent and adult cars and adult travel. So that is where where we get again, we willingly embrace as much responsibility for our children as we can afford, or as we believe is right. And then, but taint that with any support for benefit for the ex, and we go kicking and screaming. And that's the entire basis. It boils it all down into a nutshell of why we're doing child support wrong.
And it's interesting, what you're saying there, because when you look at maintenance, alimony, spousal support, call it what you want, it's got a few different names. In every state that I'm aware of, and I've worked in quite a few, I know that you actually have to prove I need alimony, child support, whatever you want to call it, that maintenance. I'm not aware that that's really the case in every state for child support. And I'm thinking through a couple of clients, that have, there's one or two kids. They want to keep the 4,500 square foot home, which in itself would indicate if you can afford a 4,500 square foot home, you probably shouldn't be needing the child support in the way that the law is written, for sure not. But yet it's still there, and they still get it in the exact same way. And I'm not advocating that people are left desolate in any way or financially struggling. I'm not saying that at all. I think it just should be fair. Everyone wants to be treated fairly, so they should expect the other person that they're dealing with to want to be treated fairly as well. And we can certainly pick up on this. We do have to go to a break, but before we do, Carl, I'm going to ask, I know it's splashed across the screen earlier, can you just tell people a quick way to get in touch with you that they can continue to learn more about you?
Yeah, certainly. You can go to splitsmart.com and also reach me by email at croberts@splitsmart.com, and then my phone number as well is there. So yeah, please check out our site, and I look forward to speaking with you.
And there's some great information on the site as well, so I encourage you to go there, and we will be right back. We're going to pay some bills. Welcome back to the Financial Wellness Hour. We are on WGSN-DB, the Going Solo Network. My guest today is Carl Roberts with SplitSmart, and I always like to recap a little bit of what we've spoken about, because we always speak about so many things and we forget about the first few things that are even mentioned sometimes. Our topic today is child support. Are we doing it wrong? And I would venture to say many people do, but I think Carl is putting it in an incredibly succinct but logical fashion as to looking at this and saying, does this make sense? And no, it might not be in many cases, in probably the majority of cases, it's not. And how do we kind of come up with a new mindset around this? But some of the things we spoke about, just, the laws the current way, some of the pitfalls that are happening, a little bit of the history of child support, how it's not in the best interest of the children. And really, when you take out the emotions, as we said, that's really the bottom line of what we want the best for are our children. I mean, we obviously want the best for ourselves. We usually, and we should always want the best for everybody, but our kids always pop up to the forefront of who we want the best for. We've spoken a little bit about it. Even amicable families are caught up in antiquated laws here. And we're gonna touch a little bit more on that, about the society as a whole and the changes of society, and have the laws kept up and all the rest. But I want to come back. There are many parents that do want to do it right and do the right thing. So can you elaborate a little bit? We did touch a little bit on this, but what are the pitfalls that trip up a good and loving, family or parents?
It's easy enough. And so there's a simple difference between contested and uncontested custody is a bad actor. That bad actor can be one or both, man or woman, lawyer or litigant. And it's typically good people, good loving parents who get tripped up by their emotions, seeking some sort of emotional justice towards the other, revenge, that type of thing. More often than we recognize, just the personality orders of narcissism, the sociopathy, and as well as borderline personality disorders. Those, and then when that comes into play, everybody's lying about money and putting the kids in the middle. People, it's about self. It's not about the child. That's the way that the state statutes of child support are written. They make it about the parents, not about the children. They put child support at the title, but it's not about the children. It's about the parents, and that's why.
So they redirect the focus of what or where the focus should be. They redirect that, I think, in many ways. And it's interesting you say, I believe I've shared this on a couple shows before, but it's about 20 months ago now. I was at a networking meeting. I was sitting next to a guy. He was a defense attorney for criminals. And I said to him, you and I, we deal with the exact opposite people generally. And he looked at me like didn't understand. I'm dealing with people going through divorce. He's dealing with criminals. I said, you're dealing with generally bad people on their best behavior, and I'm dealing with good people on their worst behavior. But the system is adversarial. The system is set up in a way, not always. I don't want to, we're generalizing, but it's usually this case where even people who want to do it amicably, based on whether it's fears, based on scarcity and thoughts, whether it's the system, the way it's set up, they all of a sudden hunker down, and it's a whole different story. And as much as it starts with amicably, it can change on a dime and become a horrible, drag out battle sometimes as well. And I think the system does a lot in creating that and that distrust. I can tell you, I can count on one hand over the last few years how many clients have said to me, I really want the best for my spouse. How do we figure that out financially, Hirsch, right? It's not happening. And you've said this, child support laws, I did a little research on them. The very first semblance of a child support law was 1950. In 1975, Congress passed a law requiring the states to create child support programs. And that's why I said earlier when I quickly Googled how many, what percentage of the workforce back in 75 were women, maybe the law, and I'm not saying it was, but potentially the law was there to save or protect the general women who were not in the system. That, clearly at this point is not the case. And I'm not saying that we don't need ways to protect our children financially. We do. But, often the laws lag behind the changes of society. And I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about that. If you've seen that, or what are your experiences around the demographics changing, but maybe, the financial needs might not be what they were 50 years ago, or 45 years ago in the same way.
Back then when, child support was originally established in the mid 70s, it was really for the low income, those who were on the verge of welfare. It wasn't for those above that economic status. And so in the 80s, that's where it took a turn for the dark side, and you saw more money in the larger income family. So it started to embrace that group there as well. But it's just this. It's the it's the side. So we want to support a child. Most everybody wants to. Not everybody does. But then you get to thinking about, okay, well, what do we do about those who don't? As a society, what can we do? We want to protect the mothers, we want to protect the children, and we want to protect the fathers. But what happens when you have the one night stand or whatever else, and you have a child, and we just got to take we want to support. When you don't support, what's the enforcement going to do? Is it going to make anything better for the child? Is it going to make anything better for anybody else? Right. Or is it just that stick there that's just, it's supposed to encourage everybody to, be good? I think the whole child support system as it stands today needs to be redesigned.
So what I'm hearing is there absolutely should be a fair system. We just not in that right now. Our system right now does not.
And I mean, and we absolutely ought to be giving the parents more ability. We ought to give them more safeguards so that they can protect what they want to do. So
Right.
we really kind of reinforce their ability to make their decisions. I mean, granted, they're not always going to get along, and when they don't, what's society going to do about it?
Right.
You know, and so you still have. I mean, again, the most important. I'm a very big advocate about shared parenting. I like equal parenting best, but even in the most amicable, loving of families, that schedule doesn't work for them. They want 75-25 or even 90-10 if that avoids the conflict. It helps the children grow healthy, loving relationships with both parents. That's the goal. All this other stuff is just backwards.
Right.
And but there is a system. And so again, a lot of amicable parents figured it out on their own outside the court system. Or even in the court system, they're going through the alternative dispute resolution methods, and they're figuring out, they're reaching agreements on support of different ways where needed. But a lot of, again, that in these demographics these days, a lot more women are a lot more in the workforce. Dual incomes. You need to share expenses to the best of your ability. I mean, because life is going to change. You're going to change jobs. Or the other's going to change jobs. Ups and downs. The child support system just exacerbates problems. It doesn't solve problems.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm thinking through a case that I worked on, I'd say 2.5 years ago already. It's been a long time, where they ran the formula. That's what went into play, and then the husband, who was paying at the time, was expecting that the kids would stay in private school, and the ex-spouse said, it was a parochial school. I don't really feel like they need a parochial school. So now the kids were the ones that were directly affected, right? And I'm just thinking through that case, and it's a lot of what you're saying. Are you creating a system that becomes expensive, inaffordable in many ways for some, and then the children are ultimately the ones picking up the pieces in many ways, and that that again, as we said earlier, could be redirecting the focus of the intent of what a child support should be. I'm going to change directions a little bit. So in many ways, actually, our philosophies are of how do we take care of clients are actually quite aligned. Mine is, I like to work with clients to prioritize, organize, and then simplify. In your words, and I'm going to quote you here, the 3 most important bits of advice for those thinking about or getting divorced are: 1, control your emotions. Don't let your emotions control you. Fantastic advice. I've said far too often to people, be careful, your emotions can be the most expensive part of your divorce. So fully on board. The golden rule was your second one. And number 3 is get organized. Organization makes 1 and 2 much easier. Agreed 100% on all 3 of those. I'm going to ask, so can you share a little more on what do you mean by being organized is kind of the first piece. I'm going to probably ask you like 10 questions in one here. What does it mean being organized? And I'd maybe start off a little bit with, like, if they're even able to, through the emotions and the lack of structure that there is today, how are people trying to stay organized, even before you talk about what do you mean?
Well, let me kind of explain that just a little bit differently. I mean, we understand what amicable parents do to kind of reach their positive outcomes. I mean, they are making 2 incredibly important and oftentimes innate decisions, whether they know it or not. The first is that they want to separate time and money, custody and child support, to more easily solve both.
Okay.
The second one is, on the money side, they're clearly distinguishing between adult benefit of money and child benefit of money. The more that they can, make it clear that it's for the child, the more we embrace, the more we welcome. When it gets tainted with anything support for the ex, that's where the conflict comes in. So so backing into your question about organization is, again, so when people start thinking, when you're less than amicable and you start thinking about child custody and child support, people are approaching that with a in a very emotional state. Most of some of their answers are more self-centered than they are child-centered, right? And so part of organization there is to start to get down all the different aspects and all the different specifics of a parenting plan, including the schedules and decision making and about 15 miscellaneous items. So the idea is at first to kind of get your thoughts down. When you put your thoughts down on paper, as opposed to them just being these verbal stances in your head.
Yeah.
As you put your thoughts down on paper, we go through a natural little progression because we don't want our words to betray us. We don't want our words to show to prove to the ex that, yeah, we are in this for ourselves. We want anybody that sees our words to say, okay, well, that is reasonable, that is child-centered. So by writing down what our thoughts are on the entire parenting plan is a big, big step towards getting to the positive outcomes. Then on the money side, it is, again, we're trying to figure out how do we share the expenses for the child. So we gotta go through a line item budget for expenses for each child. And we're trying to frame this in a different way. I mean, so if I make more money, I'm more than likely I'm happy to to pick up a greater percentage of those child expenses. And so, but as I know that they're for the child, just makes everything easier. And then those of us who want to be able, who have the wherewithal, the financial ability, most of us want to be able to kind of put more, do more than share expenses. We want to contribute to the college fund or to their first car or even give them spending and allowance money. No state recognizes any of that. Of what people are contributing, but that is the more holistic support for the child. And when it's for the child, it makes it clear that it's not about you or me, it's about the child. And so we avoid the vast amount of conflict. So just organizing our thoughts about what the parenting plan is, organizing better understanding and budgeting kind of what the expenses may be, and then kind of outlining how you want to contribute to the child accounts directly. Is the organization that is just of paramount importance, and then a lot of that you can do on your own before kind of get into conversations with the other. But when you bring the other in and they put their thoughts and down transparently, people very quickly, even less than amicable, it's the guardrails kind of keep everybody on that straight and narrow path to a happier ending.
Right. And I'm thinking a huge thing that avoids is when, 2 years in, 3 years into a divorce, when somebody wants to do a school trip and they come to dad or mom and they say, can you help? And they say, oh, go speak to the other parent. And again, automatically, because that wasn't spelled out, right? And automatically you're putting the child right in the middle of everything all over again. And this helps you avoid it because, as you said, I mean, if you really put down the needs and the wants of the kid and we look at it, we more, wanting to support our child than our ex-spouse in many instances. And that makes you more amenable to how do we figure this out? How do we make it happen? So I love that. So talk a little bit about, because I love what I'm hearing about being organized. I love hearing about where the focus should be. And quite honestly, with emotions, most people are not incredibly structured in something they've never done before, like a divorce. Add to that this enormous fog of emotion and stress, makes you even less organized. So I love hearing about this organization and being able to move beyond where I am today. How does Split Smart help people do that? What do they do and how do they help that?
On the kids side of things, it's pretty easy. When you think about it, I mean, on the parenting plan, we start with a template, the 4 areas of decision making, 4 different types of schedules, being school, summer, vacation, and holidays, and 15 miscellaneous items, of which you can always add more to it. But the first things first is just getting your thoughts down and filling in the blanks for each one of those particular line items. Right. And so that's the first part of just organizations, figuring out what we want. What do we see as the right schedule for the summer? And it may be, the kids live with, dad during the summer and mom during the school year, or whatever the case may be. And then on the money side, again, it's start to figure out, well, I mean, so this is a changing of framework of it's a mental framework. It's a paradigm shift to think about how we want, what are the budgeted expenses? Because child support today really includes just kind of this set of expenses,
right?
But what you should be considering are this set, and so as we start to think about that, again, we in a different paradigm, we just avoid the vast amount of problem. Because one of the things, not only do we want the other to see that it's not about us, we don't want to see that we want to see that the other is thinking about the kids as well.
Right.
And so it's just really incredibly easy. I mean, an amicable couple can kind of get through the parenting plan and the child support piece.
It puts you on the same page. It keeps you both organized. A couple things that I'm going to throw out from the demo that I loved as well is there's a history. As you propose things, I agree. I'm counter-proposing. There's the ability to really have a discussion around the topic, which again is the right focus of where you want to be. It helps you stay organized, as we said. It shows the history and keeps the history, so you can see how forthcoming parties have been through discovery and more. I have a few more things that I could add, but we are running out of time. So before we do that, I am going to ask one more time if you can share how people can get in touch with you, please, Carl.
Yeah, the easiest way is certainly go check out our website at www.splitsmart.com, and you can contact me from there. And there's a lot of helpful resources. Try out the app, and you'll see how easy it is.
Yeah, it is really easy to follow, by the way. I can tell you, I had a great demo. It's just got so many great tools in there and keeps you focused when sometimes just even on a personal level, it's not easy to be focused, and that alone is worth it on its, in itself. Carl, thank you for shedding light on a difficult and sensitive topic, to say the least. But you really, I think, have simplified it in a lot of ways, helping people understand the pitfalls of the current process, that there is a better way to do it, which is just, it's not an easy feat to be able to succinctly do for people in not a very long time. We limited with our time on the radio, obviously. But I really appreciate it. I am Hirsch Sermon, your host for the Financial Wellness Hour. Please do reach out to me on my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. You can reach out for me for questions, or my guest today, Carl Roberts. And I really appreciate all that you shared today. I look forward to you guys joining me 2 weeks from today. We are going to have the ladies who started the National Association of Divorce Professionals joining, their journey, their purpose, and how they are working to make divorce better for all of us as well. Thank you, and have a great week.